Everything they told you about choosing only one path is wrong. Have you ever felt that knot in your stomach when someone asks, "So, what do you do?" As if your identity could fit into a single word. Worse, how many times have you abandoned a talent or passion because it had no future? This is the greatest trap of the 21st century. We live in a society that demands versatility but rewards specialists. And the result? Entire generations feeling incomplete because they have 5 passions and can only live one. Fraudulent because they like opposite things like art and engineering. Mediocre because they spread their energy too widely or go too shallow. But what if I told you that Einstein played the violin to develop his physical intuition? That Steve Jobs studied calligraphy before creating Apple's typography? That precisely your distractions could be your evolutionary advantage? 2,400 years ago, the Greeks had a word for this erit. The excellence that comes from synthesizing depth and diversity. The problem is not wanting to know everything. It's not knowing how to connect these knots, and that's what we're going to learn today. What really drives someone to master something? Most would answer, motivation or clear goals. But that's only part of the equation, and perhaps not even the most important part. At the core of true learning, there is something more subtle and powerful: curiosity. Without it, the whole process becomes dry, driven only by external goals and fear of failure. But with it, the path becomes almost natural. In a world obsessed with results, we forget that the impulse to learn is already an end in itself. Just observe a child exploring the environment, touching objects, and asking endless questions. There is no fear of judgment or the uselessness of knowledge. There is only fascination. This pure state of discovery is the essence of the love of knowledge, and it is exactly what sustains the true polymath. Curiosity is the fuel of human progress. Without it, we would never have sent probes into space, decoded the genetic code, or created works of art that transcend time. It is what pushes us beyond comfort and routine. When learning happens only for extrinsic rewards, like diplomas, social recognition, or status, it tends to become mechanical and often temporary. But when it arises from the simple desire to understand, it takes root. Philosophers have always known this. Aristotle stated that all men by nature desire to know. For him, learning was inseparable from the experience of living. It was not about accumulating information to become superior, but about exploring reality with attentive eyes and an open mind. Learning, in this sense, is an act of humility. It is recognizing that there is always more to discover. However, many lose this drive throughout life. The pressures of daily life and the fear of failure undermine the desire to explore. The belief arises that it is no longer time to learn new things, or that it is too late to change. This is a dangerous mistake. It is precisely curiosity that prevents the spirit from aging, even if the body does. If you feel trapped in a mental routine, ask yourself, when was the last time you learned something just for the pleasure of discovering? Without rush, without obligation, just to allow yourself to grow. Maybe it's time to regain that curious outlook, to give yourself the right to ask, what if? More often, mastering anything seems, at first glance, like a gigantic task. And, in fact, it is. But gigantic does not mean impossible. The mistake many make is in how they approach learning. They think it's enough to repeat, and repeat, until something happens. But repeating without awareness is the slowest and most frustrating path. The secret lies in how you learn, and this involves principles that transcend any area of knowledge. They are strategies so effective that they can be applied both to learning guitar and to understanding philosophy or programming software. The first is simple but underrated. Teach what you learn. The Feynman technique, named after physicist Richard Feynman, reveals a powerful truth. When you try to explain something in your own words, you immediately expose what you know and what you don't know. There is no room for mistakes. If you can't make the complex simple, you haven't mastered the subject yet. That's why teaching, even to yourself or to a friend, dramatically accelerates assimilation. Another essential principle is spaced repetition. The brain was not made to absorb everything at once. On the contrary, it needs breaks to consolidate information. Reviewing content at strategically distributed intervals is what turns short-term knowledge into lasting memory. That's exactly why reviewing, days or weeks after first encountering the content, is so effective. What many do wrong is cramming everything into a single study session and then quickly forgetting. But learning fast is not just about techniques. It's about philosophy. And the most crucial one is this: patience and discipline are irreplaceable. There's no point in having the best tools if you give up at the first sign of difficulty. Progress is not linear. There will be days when advancement will seem imperceptible, and it is in these moments that most people give up. But those who understand that mastery is built through consistency, not leaps, keep going. At this point, it is important to choose what to learn first. Many fall into the trap of wanting to embrace everything at once. This only creates confusion. The smart way is to focus on what is essential. Ask yourself, what is the foundation that supports this knowledge? In language learning, for example, it's the most common words. In music, it's the basic chords. In philosophy, it's the fundamental questions. Mastering the essentials allows the rest to naturally fall into place later. The combination of these principles creates a learning approach that is both efficient and enjoyable. But even with all this, there is an obstacle that cannot be ignored: frustration. At some point, it will come. And that is exactly what we will talk about now. After the initial enthusiasm, progress begins to slow down. What once flowed easily now requires double the effort. Learning stalls. You feel like you're going in circles, and it's at this moment that many quit. But the truth is, plateaus are not signs of failure. They are inevitable phases of growth. Frustration, which once seemed like an enemy, comes to be seen as a hidden ally. That's because it is precisely during plateaus that knowledge deepens. When immediate rewards disappear, discipline is what sustains the process. And that's where few continue. Stoic philosophy has much to teach about this moment. Seneca wrote that no wind favors the one who does not know where they are going. During periods of stagnation, it's easy to lose direction and forget your purpose. But Stoicism shows that we must accept discomfort as part of the journey. It's not about seeking suffering, but about not fleeing from it when it appears. In learning, discomfort plays a crucial role. It signals that you are stepping out of your comfort zone. That is where true transformation happens. When everything is easy, you are just repeating what you already know. The difficult, what generates frustration, is exactly what expands your skills. But how do you maintain consistency during these periods? It's not simple, but it's possible. A powerful strategy is to break big goals into daily micro-challenges. Instead of aiming for total mastery of a skill, focus on the next immediate step. This is how you overcome paralysis. Read a page, practice for 15 minutes, review a concept. Small victories create a real sense of progress and sustain motivation. Another effective technique is alternating between intense focus and conscious rest. The brain does not only learn when you are active, It processes and organizes information during moments of pause. That's why respecting cycles of effort and rest is essential to avoid burnout and allow learning to settle. No one is immune to plateaus, but those who persist, who accept boredom and difficulty without abandoning their purpose, end up emerging with a deeper and more refined understanding. It is in these quiet periods that the skills which will later seem natural to others are forged. Mastering an area is already admirable, but something extraordinary happens when you start to see beyond the boundaries. Suddenly, what you learned in one field begins to illuminate another. That is where the true power of the polymath is born. Learning stops being a sequence of isolated achievements and transforms into an interconnected system that enhances creativity and effectiveness in all areas of life. Most people don't realize how often this happens in everyday life. Think of someone studying music. At first, it seems to be just about notes and rhythm. But soon, they realize they are training active listening, patience, and sensitivity. These skills, often unnoticed, influence their communication, leadership style, and even their way of resolving conflicts. The same applies to those practicing martial arts. More than just movements and defense, they learn about discipline, emotional control, and respect. And these values carry over into relationships, work, and their overall approach to life. This is called transfer of learning, when mastery in one area boosts performance in another. It's natural and happens all the time. But the polymath does it consciously. They seek out these intersections. They know that each new skill is not an end in itself, but a tool that will, sooner or later, prove useful in entirely different contexts. History is full of examples. Leonardo da Vinci used his knowledge of anatomy to paint bodies with unmatched precision. Steve Jobs brought design aesthetics to technology, creating products that were not only functional but beautiful and intuitive. They weren't limited specialists, they were connectors, people who saw what others didn't. And this is something you can cultivate too. Start by observing where your knowledge intersects. Maybe the logic you use in programming helps you structure your writing better. Or the empathy you developed in psychology improves your approach to sales. Nothing you learn is wasted. Everything finds a place, if you allow it. A systemic view of knowledge is not optional in today's world. Complex problems require creative solutions that rarely come from a single field. That's why polymaths are so valuable. They move easily between disciplines, connect distant dots, and, in doing so, create something new. Knowing how to learn is an art, but knowing when to shift focus or persist is the true sign of maturity. This is one of the most delicate decisions any polymath faces. After all, there is a fine line between persistence that leads to mastery and stubbornness that leads to stagnation. At some point, you will face the question, should I keep trying or is it time to move on? And the answer, contrary to what many think, is not purely emotional. It's strategic. Think in cycles. Learning is not a straight line. It happens in waves. There are moments of accelerated growth, periods of stability, and phases of apparent regression. Recognizing which cycle you are in is essential for making smart decisions. Persisting during plateaus, as we discussed earlier, is crucial. But staying in a field where there is no longer growth or real interest can be a waste of vital energy. Knowing when to move on means realizing that the knowledge has already served its purpose. It is integrated enough that you can apply it effortlessly. Pushing beyond that can turn into paralyzing perfectionism. It's like continuing to sharpen a blade that is already ready for use. On the other hand, knowing when to persist requires courage, especially when results are slow to appear. many give up right on the verge of a breakthrough. It's the classic one step before the gold. In these cases, quitting would be the real mistake. Eastern philosophy brings a powerful image to this dilemma. The bamboo, for years, it grows underground, invisible, until suddenly it breaks through the soil and rises rapidly. The same happens with many skills. For a long time, it seems like nothing is happening. But what's really going on is the building of strong roots. To avoid getting lost between giving up too soon or persisting too long, you need to develop self-awareness and a sense of purpose. Ask yourself sincerely, does this still challenge me? Is this still aligned with who I want to become? Answering these questions brings clarity. This is the philosophy of balance between depth and variety. Being versatile does not mean being shallow. It means knowing how to go deep where it matters, and stepping away when that depth has been reached, without guilt or fear. Mastering various areas is no longer just an advantage, it is a necessity. In a world where change is rapid and constant, those who can move across different fields become indispensable. But there is a challenge that few recognize: the silent battle against external and internal judgment. You've probably heard, or maybe even thought, something like this: he's good at many things, but excellent at none. This old stigma of the jack of all trades, the one who does everything but masters nothing, still echoes strongly. But the truth is, being versatile is not synonymous with superficiality. It's a sign of adaptability and broad vision. A modern polymath doesn't need to be the best in the world at every area they explore. They need to be excellent at integrating, at seeing patterns where others see chaos, at connecting the technical with the artistic, the logical with the intuitive, and most importantly, at applying this diverse repertoire to solve real problems. But for this identity to solidify, it is necessary to overcome an internal barrier: the fear of seeming scattered or mediocre in the eyes of others. This requires a profound shift in mindset, accepting that you don't need to follow the traditional specialist model, recognizing that being a connector, someone who moves through and builds bridges between areas of knowledge, is a higher form of mastery. At this point, ethics and responsibility come into play. The contemporary autodidact is not someone who simply consumes information randomly. They are selective. They choose what to learn with intention. They organize. They share. They are aware of the impact of their ideas and the value they can offer. This is what differentiates the true polymath from someone who is merely curious. Building this identity also involves taking a stand, showing the world your multiple facets without fear or shame. This can be done naturally by creating projects that unite distinct areas, by expressing yourself authentically on social media, or by embracing your versatile profile in conversations and professional opportunities. Versatility, in the end, is power. It is freedom, but it only becomes real when you embrace who you are and stop seeking validation through the outdated mold of singular specialization. A book left aside today may become essential tomorrow. An idea that once seemed irrelevant may make sense years later. In real learning, nothing is wasted. That's why the polymath does not rush to finish. They walk to deepen. They do not seek to arrive first, but to understand better. And this attitude brings something many seek elsewhere: peace. The peace of knowing that you do not need to master the world, only to keep learning with integrity and intention. So, at the end of this journey, the question is not what have you already mastered, but rather how willing are you to keep discovering? Because learning is not the destination, it is the path itself. If you enjoyed this content and want to understand more about life's questions, Subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone else who is also among the awakened.